So, hi, Chris. Thanks for joining me on the Rapid Insights podcast. It's great to have you here. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you, Dean. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So, Chris, you've had a very successful career. You've worked for some really large cybersecurity and IT organizations such as Kaspersky, RSA, CrowdStrike, and now Commvault. You've also authored a very well-received book on marketing, which we will provide a link to in the comments. I can see that you've been a guest speaker at events. You've volunteered through mentoring programs. So, you've been involved in lots of things, which is great. And I'm sure you'll have some really good golden advice for us on this particular podcast. So really, before we sort of get into the insights part of the podcast, let's start our conversation by delving into your career history, how you got started, major milestones, and why marketing?
Yeah, so I mean, I've worked in marketing for 20 something years now. I did a degree in advertising and marketing at the University of Bedfordshire. So we're over 20 years now. I went into it quite frankly by accident. I think, as a teenager, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. The one thing I knew I enjoyed was writing and English, and it was just a kind of common subject. And somehow, I think more just by luck than judgment, ended up sort of pursuing that slight element of creative writing interest into, what actually it was the film Jerry Maguire, which has
Yes.
got absolutely nothing to do with what I do for a living. But I thought, how do I become that guy? How do I become the guy that represents people in some way? And realized I had absolutely no ability to do that, and somehow ended up branching off and built a career in marketing.
Brilliant. So, I mean, to kind of lead the career that you've had, I'm sure you've had many challenges, like we all do throughout a career. So, I'd like to understand some of the key challenges you've kind of faced, successes, sort of
Mhm.
lessons learned along the way. And if you could give us an example of a sort of a successful cybersecurity campaign you've executed, that would be great. What made it
Hmm.
work?
So I think actually, you know what, the answer to both of those questions is actually relatively connected. I think one of the biggest challenges I found in every business I've got, every business I've worked within, has always been that interlock and the connectivity between sales, commercial functions, and marketing. And every business is different, every region is different, but ultimately, it's the connectivity between those functions that, for me, always ends up becoming kind of like the spine of what determines if marketing's going to succeed. Like if marketing and sales are really, in step on things, that we've got that kind of metaphorical handshake locked down with everything, that, marketing is executing programs based on a clear understanding of the commercial go-to-market, then marketing programs tend to work better. And I think kind of tied into both those questions, the biggest challenges have been where that bridge has not existed. And
Hmm.
I've always really enjoyed trying to build that collaborative
Yeah.
kind of go to market. For me, marketing is very much, I think I'd be doing it a disservice to call it a support function, because I don't think we are. I think we're far, far more than that. But we are an enabler, we are a facilitator, and we are an accelerator of many things. And I think all of that, though, has to be tied in lockstep with everything that sales and commercial and go-to-market teams do.
Brilliant. So interesting touching on the point of sales there. So my background the last sort of 20 years throughout my career has always been in sales. And I've kind of seen and kind of appreciate the challenges that come with, let's say, driving new business and demand, for example.
Mhm.
And I know the challenging sort of expectations that businesses and salespeople in particular can place on marketing teams. So it's really refreshing to hear that. And that's kind of, that sort of collaborative approach. And so how do you kind of perceive that relationship? Do you think it could be better aligned in your experience, or, has it only ever been positive? Is it mainly for you driving that sort of collaborative approach with sales?
It really does vary almost company to company. It almost varies week to week as well, right?
Yeah.
Sales is one of those facets of a business that tends to change quite regularly.
Sure.
Sales teams, sales leadership, sales individuals. It's not a churn, but it's a fairly tough, aggressive kind of side of an organization that you end up working with different individuals, different teams pretty regularly, which means that consistency of relationship is sometimes challenging. But I think kind of the biggest blocker is knowing how to position marketing in a way that resonates with what sales care about and what they want to hear. Because at the same time, I don't claim to be a sales expert. I always say to sales teams, you guys don't claim to be marketing experts. If we each claim to be our own, our opposite disciplines, it's never going to work. But I think at the same time, we need to understand each other's perspectives, but to an appropriate level. Like, I know for a fact that I don't need to explain the absolute intricacies and kind of nuts and bolts of every marketing program, and all of the little minutiae of things to the sales leader, or even to sales teams. But there are certain components that they really need to understand the mechanics of, so they can then leverage it. For an example, even something as simple as an event. There's obviously small nuances and things that it's about how do you make sure the teams get how to leverage it in an effective way that matters to them as well as to the business. And then on the flip side of that, it's the more I think marketers can understand at least some of the nuances to what sales work with, some of the challenges they go through, the ways in which they tend to approach things like pipe building and deal acceleration and stuff like that. The more you can understand both sides of the conversation, the more you end up building a relationship that becomes far more collaborative.
I like that. That's really good. The collaborative piece, that's what it's all about, that collaboration, isn't it? And you've got kind of that culture and methodology within the company. So I guess kind of touching on your area of expertise, as it were, Chris. So in terms of sort of, I'd like to get into a little bit about sort of key methods that you use to sort of differentiate your brand. Let's take where you're working at the moment, for example. There's a plethora of channels out there. We see that in Cyber News Group, conferences, digital, virtual events. Kind of what's your view on marketing channels in general, and which have proven to be most effective? We've got AI coming in now, so it'd be good to get kind of your insight on that. What's your thoughts on the current state of play?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I think the selection of tactics, of programs, of campaign kind of structure, for me, is almost secondary to the why. And I've always been quite conscious. Like I remember reading a book some years ago by a guy called Brian Kramer, who I think the book was "There's no more B2B, B2C. It's now H to H, so it's human to human." And weirdly, although that's a concept that's not necessarily that innovative at the time, there was something around the positioning of that kind of connected to me quite personally. And I think as marketers, regardless of whatever we're doing, the one thing we need to understand is that whilst data and metrics are absolutely essential to everything we do now, marketing is a science almost as much as anything else these days, but it also has to resonate on a human level in a way that respects the individual, isn't just a set of criteria, or it's not a demographic score or a behavioral score. It is an individual with its own nuances in the same way that we all are. And I think the more you reflect that, and actually therefore you kind of almost remind yourself that you need to value that individual's time and engagement far more than just going, how many times can I spam them with an email and hope by some kind of weird war of attrition that they eventually come to my event? Like, you need to respect what's going to matter to them and deliver something in a way that's going to value their time, value their situation. The more you can understand their context, their organization, the more you can take. And it probably relates to things like ABM and account-based selling and those kind of concepts. And I think the more you weave that into anything you do, the more you deliver campaigns and programs that are far more efficient. And I think tied in with that, it's like a terminology I've used for a number of years is really around avoiding random acts of marketing. So avoiding things that have not got a deliberate commercial or KPI driven or just a really defined objective before you choose it.
Yes.
Events are a prime example. The number of times marketers, and I've been guilty of it enough times myself, we go, what we need to do, let's do an event. Why an event?
Reason.
Why is that the right mechanic? What do we need to talk to? Who do we need to talk to? Why are we going to make them care? How do we add value to them? And then actually the mechanic. Maybe an event is the thing that overlays on top of that, but I think it's that decision-making process that's so crucial beforehand.
Perfect. That's absolutely brilliant. So, one of the reasons that we started this podcast, one of the reasons we started this podcast is to share knowledge just like that, kind of amongst our peers. Really, I think it's important really to level everybody up. So, I'd love to know what advice you'd give to listeners who want to advance in marketing and build a successful career like yours.
I think the one thing that almost any marketer has to remember is always be humble. Genuinely, I think no matter what level you get to within marketing, from an entry-level marketer to a CMO, I think being humble and remembering that your function and your role and your team is very much a part of a kind of overall go-to-market within a business. You're there to make a business successful, but I think the best marketers are the ones that don't let their egos lead the way. That are open to being receptive and listening and understanding the dynamics of a business, the dynamics of sales and go-to-market teams and channel teams, and really collaborating in a way that's not driven by what's the big shiny thing that's going to make me look great, because that it might be good for a bit of internal PR for 5 minutes, but it's not going to be the thing that moves the needle. And I think the more you're willing to put that ego aside and be constantly willing to learn and adapt, because the market changes so regularly. Cybersecurity as an industry has changed vastly since I came into it 20 years ago.
Yep.
Marketing has changed vastly since I came into it 20 years ago. I think the need to maintain that piece I was just talking about, with a real desire to keep innovating and looking for ways to never just rinse and repeat the same stuff because maybe it worked last time, but always look to optimize or kind of evolve the stuff you're doing.
Brilliant. And that's that. I guess that's this old phrase, repeating the definition of madness, repeating the same things, isn't it? So
Yeah.
Brilliant. Chris, that's awesome. Thank you very much for the answers and joining us on the Rapid Insights podcast. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. No problem at all. Thanks, Dean.